Hey, welcome to Manalizing. This is where men talk about the kind of stuff that men don't talk about. Put your hard hat on, get ready for a ride. Here we go. Hey, welcome to Manalizing. I'm Garth Haslam. I have a treat for you today. Joe DeVito, Sovereign Men Man's Group, JoeDeVitoCoaching.com. I wanted to get those out first because I don't want to forget them. This guy is amazing. His story just left me floored. His wisdom left me speechless, literally speechless. Here is a man who gets it, who's been through the lowest of lows. What a man. Here you go. Welcome to Manalizing, where men talk about what men don't talk about. Joe DeVito, how did I meet you?
On a men's group page.
Men's group page. Tell me about that men's group page.
The name of the page, Spherical Man.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you put a post. That page is dedicated to basically a large men's group where men can connect with each other. They can share vulnerably. They can just connect with each other at the deeper level. And that's what I enjoy about it. I learn a lot from a lot of what the men are sharing on that. And I can also contribute. And there's not many things like that in our culture. And so I find it online.
There's nothing. You said connect at a deeper level. You know, I have a group of friends that I have cultured over the last few years. I've spent the vast majority of my life basically being the typical man where it's like, okay, I'll adopt whatever friends my wife has. But, you know, if crisis moment ever comes, I'm not going to talk to them. Not going to talk to the wife. Not going to talk to another man. I'm going to deal with my issues by not dealing with them and stuffing them down. So the last few years, we've gone to places down closer to your neck of the woods, Marysville, Utah,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, just brought a few friends and done a little bit of four-wheeling and a little bit of hanging out, and a little bit of talking. And one of the coolest quotes is a dude named Robert Snow, who I interviewed. He says the conversation changes in Marysville. And we get a little more vulnerable and we get to where we can actually talk to each other. And it gets a little deeper. And it is amazing to me how much everybody, every man, every woman relishes the opportunity to go a little deeper and talk a little more about stuff that really matters, and not about that was a dusty trip, or it was raining more than usual today, or I think I'd like pizza for dinner. You know,
Mm-hmm.
A little more vulnerable. There's so much value that I think we all crave, but we don't know how to do it. Except for you do. I think you do.
Yeah. I've had to learn to cultivate that for myself. It wasn't taught to me.
No.
It wasn't really modeled growing up either.
So you've accomplished some things in your life. What's your secret sauce? What's the formula? Or maybe before we go that direction, let's still just keep introducing you to the crowd, to the one person that listens to this.
Yeah.
Tell me about you. How did you grow up? What were conditions like? What was easy? What was hard?
Sure. I'm happy to. I grew up in Southern California, in Long Beach, California. My father and mother split when I was about 2 years old. And then I was primarily raised by my father. And my time with him was nothing short of blissful growing up. I was able to witness some volatility from him, some projected rage and stuff like that at times, not directed towards me, but within the family unit, which was quite frightening for me to be a young boy and witness that. He committed suicide when I was the age of 7. I was in the home when this happened. He shot himself. And my grandmother took over at that point for about a year until my mother came into my life. Growing up with my father, he always, assured me I was his best friend. I That's all I can remember really of him, is how loving he was with me. Standing at the beach watching the sunset, he has his arms around me, holding me tight. He thought the world of me. And so I'm really appreciative and grateful that I was able to have that kind of experience with him the short time that he was in my life. When he died, I think that's when my life really started running solely on fear. Shortly after that, I started developing a belief that I was only going to live a life of suffering from there forward. I remember developing that belief at a really early age. My mom came into my life when I was about 9 years old, and I spent about 4 years with her. The first 2 years were beautiful. I obviously didn't know her, but when she came to pick me up from my grandmother, I knew exactly who she was, and she kneeled down before me and opened her arms, and I just ran to her chest. That was my new safety. And about the third year, or beginning of the third year that I was living with her, she developed alcoholism and a pill addiction. She became verbally abusive, physically abusive, would accuse me of stealing her pills and her beer, trying to hide it from her. She would make me feel horrible for, those beliefs that she had about me. And I had a little brother at the time too that had came to live with us that she had from a different marriage. And I took on the caregiver and protector role in the family at that point. Numerous nights and mornings waking up to her naked on the couch, some other drunk person laying next to her. Having to go to the local church to see if they could help us out with rent money and grocery money so that I could get all the rent paid and get groceries. And that lasted until I was about 13 years of age. My mother's brother, my uncle, to take my younger brother because I couldn't care for him anymore. At that point, we had ran away together, and I was just couch surfing at different friends' houses, those who were kind enough to let me in. And that was most everybody. Everybody always saw my potential before I could, and I appreciate that, but I had to find it for myself. That time with my mother, seeing her unconscious quite often just triggered the memory of my dad's passing time and time and time again. And so it was really hard for me to find any type of safety in this world and security, let alone having nothing but wounded masculine men modeling to me what it looks like to treat a woman, because she was in abusive relationships with men that would take advantage of her. I've watched her get sexually assaulted one night, and all of that was being conditioned into me at an early age. And so I couldn't make any sense of the world that I was living in early on, but I did develop an acute sense of self-awareness in my early childhood. I've always been extremely aware of how I feel because I had to be in order to protect myself, which has been a blessing in disguise now that I'm an adult. So that was, early childhood. High school was really difficult for me. I was the class clown. That was my way of mitigating some of the pain that I felt internally.
Right.
Always making people laugh, getting kicked out of class for making people laugh. I was the jokester archetype, if you're familiar with archetypes.
Yes.
And, although there was consequences for that behavior, it was a way for me to survive, and it protected me from letting people too close to my pain. That abandonment wound runs deep for me.
Yeah, I understand on one level. If you can keep people at a certain distance with continuous humor, and I've personally dealt with pain by using humor. At some of my darkest moments is when I was the funniest.
Yeah, I went to a friend's funeral about 2 months ago, and he was another one of the funny guys that I grew up with, known him forever. And everybody at his funeral was wondering, God, he was the life of the party. Like, how could he have committed suicide? I don't understand this. I said, him and I had Robin Williams syndrome. It's the way we dealt with pain most of our life.
Tell me about Robin Williams syndrome. That was hard to say.
Well, that was a man that was suffering in silence. And he got through his whole life of being the funny guy, although he was extremely creative, but he had that unconscious shadow of pain that haunted him. And I've been to that spot, and I'll get to that in a minute if you'd like for me to continue sharing.
Yeah, keep going.
So after high school, Well, about my senior year, I met a friend, and his mother had invited me to come stay with them. And they provided me a very structured and consistent home to live in. And she was a businesswoman here in southern Utah, and with a chip on her shoulder to outproduce the men in the community, right?
Yes.
So she was my mentor. I started off selling used cars. Well, I started off washing used cars, but then I started selling, and I did so well with sales, and ended up becoming the sales manager. And then we ended up going in business together with an RV business in southern Utah. And so I found that success was a way for me to really cope with my pain, outward success. I sold real estate, had an art, was partners in the RV dealership, had a marketing firm, and there was one day that quit working.
What do you
And
mean?
when it quit working, I didn't know quite what to do with myself. I had just gotten a bad motocross accident. I was prescribed pain medications, and that would be the start of a downward spiral for me that would last several years in the realm of addiction. I lost everything within a year's time. I was kicked out of the company. I got divorced. Well, in 1 week, I was kicked out of the company. I got divorced, and I abandoned my sister, who I adopted. She came into my life, in this story as well, when my mother came knocking on my door, and I saw she was going through the same things that my brother and I went through, so I adopted her. But then I abandoned them and moved to Northern California to find myself. And that lasted about 4 years. I found out my shadow followed me everywhere I went, everything that I was not dealing with. And I came back to St. George, Utah, and started using pills again. And that got too expensive, and I found heroin. And within about 6 months of using that, I was a homeless heroin junkie with a needle in his arm, wandering the streets of St. George, Utah, in and out of jail. I'd managed to sober up for a little while and had a couple of children of my own, but I couldn't stay sober. My son was about 1 year old, and my daughter was about, let's see, he was about 1.5. My daughter was 6 months when I tried to get sober again. That last week using was, I had many rock bottoms. I mean, you can tell from my story, I've had many rock bottoms. However, this one took the cake. My last day using, I was in a concession shack at a local stadium in St. George, Utah, where I was sleeping. It was the middle of winter, December 28th, my birthday. And I had a backpack and photos of my two kids laying on the cement. And the shame that I felt that I would never be a part of their life again, I intentionally overdosed. I used enough heroin to kill 3 people, and woke up 6 hours after that, black and blue, nearly frozen to death, with so much awareness of what it was that I've been avoiding and running from my whole life. My father's suicide flashed before my eyes. My mother emotionally and physically abusing me flashed before my eyes. The shame I felt about abandoning my sister and my children flashed before my eyes. I couldn't ignore it. And I walked 5 miles to a local detox center, pounding on the door without a dollar, in my pocket. And I asked them to scholarship me. I had been there 5 times before, but I think they could tell that I was ready at that moment, and they let me in. They put me in their detox center for about 7 days, and I've been sober since, going on 4 years now.
I have
And
so many questions. Keep going.
yeah. After I did a detox in an inpatient rehabilitation center and their intensive outpatient program, I did it all. I walked out of the intensive outpatient addiction recovery center feeling, one day I just walked out of group and I said, this isn't for me anymore. What I need is deeper than this. And I found a therapist who did hypnotherapy, shadow work, breath work, and meditation, a trauma specialist. I did that for a few years. I came face to face with every bit of the stuff that I've been running from and trying to avoid my whole life, but in a kind, loving, nurturing environment that was supportive of where I was in my journey. And I started having just rapid awareness with this trauma therapy and the shadow work that I was doing and learning meditation. Been meditating twice a day for nearly 4 years now, and it's absolutely changed my life. I have my children, but I've had my children back in my life. I was about a year into recovery when I started to be able to see them again. There were strict boundaries placed on me for good reasons that I had to adhere to and respect. And now I am just a blessed father of a 3.5-year-old and a 5-year-old.
That's awesome.
So, in that time, doing all the shadow work, spiritual work, I found my purpose in working with other men to reclaim their masculinity in a healthy way, to be conscious fathers and conscious leaders of the community, to build self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and to provide them a safe, nurturing space for them to dive inward to their depth, visit the pain, and have a sense of mastery over the life they want to create.
Talk about turning lemons into lemonade. That's not even a very good analogy for what you're doing. You turned the darkest of dark into and I don't use this term lightly. You turned your life into a lighthouse. So many questions that I have. I wish I could even remember them all. But you talked about men owning their masculinity. What does that mean to you?
For me, that means first, it's a journey of self-awareness, first and foremost, that I take, men on. And the way I do that is through a modality known as shadow work. You can call it parts work or internal family systems, just dealing with the deeper aspects of the male psyche. Uncovering the way that we've been conditioned to see strength as some end all be all to live our life off of. And we've got a very skewed vision of what strength really means. But it's what's been modeled to us in society.
Yes, it has.
And
strength means some very odd things. Strength means for most of us men, it means sit down and shut up and don't tell anybody about your stuff. That's strength theoretically, and it's not strength, but it is stupid.
Well, that's the shadow side of strength.
I wanted to talk to you about shadow. Let's talk about the shadow side of strength. You used the term shadow before. Talk to me about that.
So the shadow is the unconscious parts of ourself that we reject, suppress, or deny. This is where shame is born. This is where all of those lower vibrational feelings are housed, is in the shadow. And these are things that we are unaware of. And so we walk around basically unconscious, projecting all of these shadow parts of ourself outward. And relationships especially is where most of the projection happens. We're either extremely reactive anytime there's an emotional intensity brewing within the relationship, where we either shut down or hop in the truck and chirp the tires on our way out of the driveway because we want to avoid conflict. We don't know what to do with it. It's the 7-year-old little boy in all of men that had a father that was devoted to providing at all costs, even if it meant never emotionally bonding with my son. And that has an effect on us when we're growing up, because we can only, at 7 years old, we can only go as far as making a meaning that there's something wrong with me individually. We can't see that dad's working his tail off and is overly stressed about finances and stressed out about the relationship with mom, and that it has nothing to do with us. So we take that all on. We're very ego-centered human beings from 0 to 7. Yeah. And so all of that stuff gets stored in what's known as the shadow, the unconscious or the subconscious mind. And it's what gets projected outward. A couple of the different shadow sides of myself was like the abandonment wound. The abandonment wound that was built when my father committed suicide. I felt I was unworthy of love. It was just a general sense of unworthiness, which played out in all aspects of my life. There was no way that I was going to create the life that I felt like I knew was possible for me, or do the extreme things that I knew I was capable of doing, because there was something holding me back, and I felt very unfulfilled. And that's all boils down to an unconscious belief of I'm not worth it.
You're not enough.
Not enough. And it's not something we can actually see. We can't see that we're not enough, but there's experiences that we have as human beings that trigger that belief. And the more often we see it, the deeper it goes into the subconscious, and it becomes our operating manual to live life.
When I got started on Manalizing, this is huge. This is just such a massive project to try and change the culture of men, from thinking that strength, it means that you have to be an island and have to never have feelings, never deal with your stuff, and then beat your wife every Friday night. That version of masculinity, that's toxic. But it's and at the same time, you probably heard the quote from Brene Brown where she talks about how a man came up to her, said that he would rather, he felt like his wife and his daughters would rather see him die on his white horse than fall off of it.
Yep.
All of which is so broken. So I, as I was starting this Manalizing, I was like, I'm not enough to do this. What makes me think I can do this? And I was about ready to quit until a couple of minutes later, somebody came up and said, "Hey, I heard your last podcast. It was awesome." And I thought, that's what I needed. Since that time, there's been 1,000 other moments where I was like, I'm not enough. I can't do this. And what came back was, yeah, you're right. I can't, but I've got a team of people around me that can help.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I've learned in that category, is that, we all feel like we're not enough. And I certainly am not, but we move forward anyway. That's how I deal with it. How have you dealt with that?
With the feeling of not enough?
Yeah.
I'll keep saying this throughout the entire interview, but shadow work.
Mm-hmm.
I will always go back to that, because I have to be able to bring what's unconscious conscious, so that it's in my awareness, so I'm aware of it, so that I can change it. Now, in the process of shadow work, where I'm looking at like all the parts of me that I've repressed, suppressed, denied, judged, shamed. In those parts is what's known as the golden shadow. My purpose was hidden in there. My mission in this life was hidden in there. My creativity, my resilience, all of these beautiful qualities and traits and values were hidden in my shadow. And once I started to connect with that, doing things that I'm passionate about, being able to engage in the joy of life, like that naturally dissipates. So it's not just one thing that we can do to combat the feeling of unworthiness or not enoughness. It's the natural result of doing the inner work. You just automatically become enough.
Automatically become enough. Man, I wish I was good enough to ask you follow-up questions on that one. Did I hear you say that your purpose, and I'm going to extend that and mean any man's purpose or any person's purpose, is buried among their shadows?
For me, it was.
For you, it was.
And so far, the men that I've worked with, it's been the same for them, because they were unable to see it until they were unblocked.
Uh-huh.
It's like, if I can't see love, I must be blocked from it in some way. And that's a huge one for men, is love, because we are natural givers of love.
I'm imagining a pile of manure, and you got to dig through the manure to find the golden treasure box.
Yeah.
That's got to be true for, I can only think all of us. That until you get the manure dealt with, you can't deal with your purpose. That's
and joy. I mean, all of it's in there. It's the story of the golden Buddha that was, covered up in clay, so that the neighboring country that was invading them wouldn't, steal it.
Uh-huh.
And over the years, the mud started, or the concrete mud that was covering the golden Buddha started to crack and peel away. And one man, a monk, came by and noticed there was something shiny behind the veil, the concrete, and he started chipping away slowly at it and uncovered a golden Buddha. And that's the same for us as human beings. I mean, especially men, we are up against so much conditioning in this culture that we must be stoic, that we must be strong, we must dominate, we must be in control all of the time. And none of it is true. That's not the nature of masculinity. It's the wounded side of masculinity that is just being projected in our culture. We see it in politics, we see it in war, it's all over.
It's a broken default sort of masculinity that we pick because we don't know anything else. It's kind of
right.
The lowest rung of all, but it's something that we can go, that's a thing. So we go there because that's all that we can see.
Yeah. And in that is the biggest lie we've ever been sold. In this, in the United States culture, especially, where like I've had all of the things that were supposed to be it, the business, the wife, the house, the dog, the cars, the side-by-side ATVs, motorcycles, all of it. And at that peak is where I felt most unfulfilled,
most empty,
because I did not know thyself.
And if a guy is empty inside, you can go for all of the peripheral stuff, like you mentioned, the job, the house, the wife, the toys, and you can project to others that you've got your stuff together with the toys.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that you know who you are.
No.
So what is masculinity?
I'm still finding that out.
That's a good answer.
And I started this journey trying to define that, but I found that I was putting myself in a box. There's certain qualities and characteristics that make up masculinity, such as strength, courage, mastery, compassion. I mean, there's a lot of these things that make up masculinity, but it's about finding out what it means to be good at being a man for ourselves.
Yeah, I guess there's also, you mentioned the job, the car, some of those trappings. There's also your health. How much how much muscle do you have? How handsome are you? What's the size of the unit? There's so many things we can use to identify or to measure ourselves as a man, and they're all meaningless. And I think a woman would tell you, if you just were to know who you are, really, that'd probably be better than having all the trucks and the toys and the job.
Yeah. Healthy masculinity is another one of those byproducts of doing the inner work. You know what I mean? And the latest trait that I found with masculinity that was very deep within me was assertiveness, which is a very masculine trait. And I didn't understand its power until I started diving into it and practicing assertiveness, meaning the ability to. So let me back up. Why assertiveness is so important for men. One of the things that triggers our anger is disrespect.
Right.
And so the way that I minimize that is with being assertive and being able to assert boundaries and maintain them. I always wondered why I felt so walked on in relationships or not even acknowledged for anything that I do in the relationship. And it was because I didn't have boundaries that I was asserting that would lead me to being respected.
Oh, you're talking my language, dude. I think so many of us.
That and integrity, of course, but
yeah. Well, and there's a very significant difference between being assertive and being abusive. I think abusive is kind of the opposite thereof. Assertive is, I'm going to expect you to treat me with respect, and I will do the same with you. Abusiveness is you will honor me or I'll hit you.
Right. It's a very passive role.
Yeah. And, in my experience, what you're talking about is the reason for me being divorced the first time. I had a first wife who, she did what she wanted. She had daddy issues, and she decided at one point that I was her daddy, and she hated her dad. So she tried to work out her daddy issues by hating me, and I allowed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned to be disrespected and not do anything and just deal with it, because I didn't know how to do anything else.
Was that modeled to you to be
It
I'm
was.
sure you've heard of the nice guy syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. My mom was very dominant in my parents' relationship. My dad would go to work, he'd come home and he'd disappear. Usually he'd go do a second job or something, but my mom was very dominant. So it was modeled to me, but it was modeled poorly. And then with my first marriage, I dealt with things that way, and it resulted in at one point I ran into somebody else who was like, who you think you are, that's not who I see. And I was like, oh, really? Tell me more. And that was all it took.
Mm-hmm.
So then, because I was such a wimp and allowed that sort of stuff to happen, there was a divorce. My daughter, you mentioned that the kids think it's their fault. She thought it was her fault. She says, come back home. We'll be nice. We'll be good. I tried to tell her, it's not got anything to do with you, but she didn't believe it. She has lived a hard life because I was her protector, and I left. I was gone. She had no protector. And to this day, bulimia, drugs, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And that all stems from me not setting boundaries. So I can identify with what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's we
there's a high
teach people
price
how
to
to
pay.
treat us.
Teaching people how to treat us. You probably do that with men too, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep. The biggest issue I find with my clients so far, I mean, the most common theme to date is a lack of fulfillment in life. And you touched on exercise, but I mean, in all areas, we have to do work on, whether it's relationship or physical health, or spiritually, physical health, relationships, health, what they're doing for their body aside from exercise, as far as food health is concerned. And there's a lot of shame around fatherhood. They do not feel like they're showing up enough for their children.
Yeah. My dad, for example, thought that he was probably doing his role by bringing in the money. I needed a little more than that.
Can I ask you what you did need that you think of that you really, really needed in those moments?
Yeah. Turn the rules around. I'll take some questions. What I needed from him, I felt like his role in the family was limited to being the executioner. If my mom felt like I needed a beating, it was go beat your son, and he'd come, right. He'd go do it. And he was also he grew up in a children are to be seen and not heard sort of environment. So he learned it honestly as well. Mm-hmm. But I would have liked to have seen him throw me a couple of footballs.
Yes.
He did assign my brother to do that, but my brother treated it like a task, and I knew I was a task, and so I got no value out of it.
Yeah.
He did try taking me to football games for a while, and I've mentioned this on a number of other podcasts. The only thing that we would talk about to and from the game is how to get to the game and how to get home from the game. I didn't know that he could carry a conversation until after my mom died. He was about 85 at the time. He, what would I have liked from him? I didn't do sports. I was as much a nerd then as I am now. I didn't go play little league football. It wasn't a thing. We were told we didn't have the money for it. But even if he would have sat down and played chess with me, but basically my dad, he was a simple man. He grew up in a cow town out in eastern Utah, and didn't have a lot of training himself. And I'm sure he did the best that he could, but it left some things. And, and like I say, he was trained that he wasn't interesting until he was old enough to work. And then as a worker, then he became valuable. And, that's just another one of the items that is a broken expectation of men.
Yeah, and we take that on. That's another area that I work with men on. Because I had to do the work on myself in this area. I was wondering why, one of the things that was lacking in a lot of my relationships was this feeling of not being acknowledged. And I wondered why that was so important to me. And then I realized that most all of my self-worth is wrapped up in my utilities as far as what I do in the world.
Your utilities, meaning what? Yeah, your job, what the stuff you accomplish.
Yeah. And, once I started to look at that, I'm like, okay, well, acknowledgement now feels like kryptonite. Like it just feels like love to me.
Right.
It's like my life force. I really enjoy when I'm being acknowledged for what I'm doing that is from an authentic place.
Right. So yeah, that's a default for us men. You meet, the first thing you find out is what's your name. The second is, what do you do for a living? And it's kind of like, what's your value to the universe? Right. Is that next question. And then if the guy says, well, I'm the CEO of General Electric, then you're a big cool guy. If you're a janitor at the junior high, something else.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've got a friend, Robert Snow. I've interviewed him. He's a cool guy. But he has changed what that second question is for him. It's like, what do you enjoy doing? And getting away from even that man programming, hard. Yeah, we have a long way to go. I'm grateful you're doing what you're doing. Talk about for a minute what you're doing. What do you do? How does it work? How does somebody get a hold of you? What does it look and feel like? Just tell me about the experience.
Right now, I just finalized another program that I offer for men, which is called the Conscious Fatherhood Program. This is a program that men can enroll in, basically that teaches them to build emotional intelligence, qualities such as empathy, open communication, being really active with their children, and coming to that place of awareness of how they show up does impact their child's development. And I know this firsthand. The importance of being a conscious father means we are a fully aware father of what our absence does to our children, how being emotionally connected to our children impacts them. And I've seen it firsthand with my kids. My kids are so emotionally intelligent for being 3 and 5. They can communicate with me how they feel, why they feel that way, and also what their needs are. But I have those conversations with them and I model to them what that looks like. And I'm aware of, how coddling affects a toddler. I'm aware of like all these other different things on how it can negatively impact my child's development. But, you look at the statistics in our culture and why I developed this program. 60% of youth behavioral disorders is a representation of an absent father. And that doesn't mean that the father is totally absent from the family picture, but that he's not emotionally available. And then you look at the addiction statistics, the rape and sexual abuse statistics, they're all extremely high in single mother homes or a home where the father is not emotionally present.
Yeah.
And so with my own journey with my kids, like that became like the number one thing I wanted to start to develop was a conscious fatherhood program and really help men find what their truth is and what's lacking in their relationship with their children. Because we feel that as men in the form of shame or guilt. I have not met a father who enjoys being away from his children all the time, yet they think it's the only way to live. And they cry and they have so much shame attached to it. And we cannot be the best versions of ourselves anytime there's shame present in any capacity. And so we got to work through that. But my primary program is a 3-month deep dive program where we really just go in and start uncovering what it is that's actually running a man's life. All of the conditioning that he's received from society, familial, cultural, and societal conditioning. We look into areas of self-worth, building confidence, finding out their potential, but it's deep inner work. And we develop self-compassion processes, along the way, because we need to have self-compassion if we're going to dive deep into ourselves and uncover the parts that we don't want to look at, the parts that we know are shit, excuse me for saying that, but how we're showing up in relationships versus how we really want to be showing up in relationships, but we don't know how to get there.
Right.
Like all of it. And so my minimum program is a 3-month program. It consists of me giving tools for self-compassion, tools for self-awareness, and men coming up with all of their own answers, which is really empowering because we have the answers hidden within us. And it just takes somebody probing us and asking us powerful questions in a way that allows that part of ourselves to kind of come up.
I love that term, powerful questions. How do you do that? Do you bring people to a location there in Southern Utah?
No, right now it's done primarily virtually. I have two people that I'll go into their home and work with them. That's where they feel safest. But most of the time it's done virtually. We'll get into breathwork practices and meditations just for the simple fact that it requires a calm nervous system for us to go into the subconscious and do that deep work. I also do hypnotherapy alongside of my shadow work practitioner stuff, because that puts us into a childlike state where our mind is very pliable and working together, all parts of it, so that we can become fully conscious long enough to cultivate a deep sense of self-awareness.
Yeah. Like, how did you land on this? Did you go down the road of getting the psychology degree, or?
I studied psychology, and then I didn't like it anymore. So throughout my spiritual awakening, and then I started diving into, I studied consciousness and human potential for 2.5 years. And in that, I was doing a meditation one day, exploring what my purpose and mission is in life. And all I got back was, through a series of asking myself questions, was men are suffering. And I didn't know how at that time. I mean, I knew I had suffered as a man in this culture, comparing myself to alpha males and beta males and all this other stuff that goes on. But then I went into, I hopped online and found a conscious and spiritual men's embodiment coaching program to take, which was 9 months long. We did parts work, internal family systems therapy, men's embodiment practices, working with the nervous system, working with the subconscious mind. Like, it was a deep dive for 9 months straight. And then I started my personal, professional practice.
Right. Yeah. Again, Robert Snow, I don't know why he keeps coming up in today's conversation, but he decided that he was going to, with his wife, become a marriage guru. And, rather than do the psychology thing, he still went through a set of courses and became a very specialized sort of a guy. And he's doing very well. He's saving a lot of marriages. He's making a difference, and he's with his wife, teaming up to find and execute their purpose. And I admire him greatly for that. And for the same reason, I admire you, because you found a way that is your way, that gets you to be able to do what you need to do. And, maybe you take the psychology classes, you realize it doesn't work. And rather than say, well, this is the way everybody does it, I need to continue to do it this way, it's like, no, this doesn't work. I'm going to do it my way. Thank you very much. And then you do. And that's, to me, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah. I've become quite I challenge everything, right? I didn't I didn't study consciousness and human potential at a general Western education program. It's called Maharishi International University, which is a consciousness-based education system where they develop the student so that they can learn. And I challenge almost everything. I've learned to just challenge the status quo and ask myself powerful questions. Does this serve me? Is like the most powerful question I can ask.
If a person, you or I or somebody, were to create a course on just how to ask powerful questions, we could cause some damage.
Yeah. I mean, our language shapes our reality, including the way that we use language with ourselves.
What would you say is you've described many low moments in your life. What's your lowest? And why did that turn out to be a blessing for you?
It had to have been addiction. I used to think I knew loneliness and despair, but with addiction, it's magnified 100,000 times. It took everything away from me. And I don't mean externally, but any amount of hope, which is so necessary in this realm of being human. It put me into deep despair, and that despair ended up being the gift I needed to get out. However, being homeless, being an IV heroin user, you start to see how the culture really shows up for those who are suffering, and you become extremely lonely because you don't feel seen by anybody. And so that was my lowest moment. Absolutely. Even in comparison to my first daughter, who was born and then, died when she was born, my father committing suicide, my mother ended up dying shortly, after we departed and disconnected. But all of that wasn't anything in comparison to the suffering I accumulated through addiction. I shared a little bit on the gift that it did provide me, the gift of awareness. I mean, addiction served as a catalyst for my journey of healing and growth. It was like exponential. Once I faced that, once I had the awareness of what it was I was trying to run from or avoid or not look at, and then now the role that I'm showing up in this life to help other men, like, I had to go through those things. It's the hero's journey. And now I take what I've learned and come back to the community and share that with the community, completing that cycle of the hero's journey. I'm not going to say I'm grateful for addiction by any means. I think that would be a little bit ignorant for me to say that, but I'm fully aware of the gift that it provided me. As a result of addiction and that deep level of suffering, I understand the spiritual truths at a deeper level, that there is grace in suffering. The other spiritual truth that I've come to know is that grief is just love with nowhere to go. Those are some of the gifts that have been born out of the low point in my life of suffering through addiction. It's made me an amazing father, because I went through I abandoned my children for addiction. And the awareness that it provided me when that first day after, or that moment I woke up out of the intentional overdose, being blasted with that awareness, I knew that I was here to break the cycle of drug abuse, neglect, abandonment that runs deep in my family history. I'm the one breaking that. And that has a lasting, when we talk about legacy, a lot of people in this culture think, oh, well, what am I leaving for my family? It's like, I want to raise such emotionally and self-aware children that develop their purpose and live their potential, because then their children will follow, and then their children will follow. And that's a motivator for me. What kind of impact can I create now on the lives of other people that shows up 7 years down the line, where they don't have to live in a world ran by toxic behavior or wounded men?
Talk about the ultimate gift. I mean, if you look at it that way, what would a man rather leave his children? $10 million each, and them not knowing who they are or how to spend or invest that, and and having broken relationships with everybody, or 50 cents, and them knowing who they are and having a good life because they know how to create boundaries. They know how to have good relationships. They know how to be around their spouses, their children, they know how to have friends. They know how to be supported and support others when on a daily basis. Which would you rather leave? Your kids? And I'd never considered it that way, but my goodness, that's gold right there. We'd all rather leave kids being successful rather than just give them the money that they might just use on more heroin.
Sure. Yeah, any man that's listening, I would definitely encourage them to self-reflect and maybe even ask themselves a simple yet powerful question. If I was to die tomorrow, what would I regret?
Yeah.
For me, I was asked that question a year and a half ago on a podcast, and it was, did I love enough? And did I take the leap of faith to uncover my potential? And that's still difficult for me, taking that leap of faith. And because there's so many things I want to do.
Uh-huh.
There's such an impact that I want to have in the world. And I'm very, very mindful of what my end day, I have it in my journal, how many days I have left if I was to live to 80, and what do I want to accomplish in that time. I'm very conscious and aware of only having, 14,580 days left. So it's a great motivator for me.
Yeah. Right.
But we need to look at those aspects.
A number of years ago, I felt like, I really only have until I'm 65 for me to accomplish things. And then I talked to some people who were like 70 something, and they said, life doesn't necessarily end for you at 65. At 63, yeah, I'm not getting too much further than I am. What are the two things that you would like to create that you haven't by the time you get to whatever the goal age is?
Well, the one that I'm working on now is creating a retreat for both men and young men, where young men can come in and experience a rite of passage, if you will, an initiation into manhood, and then them receiving, a couple months after the retreat of coaching to help integrate what they've learned. I see a huge need for that in our culture nowadays, where a lot of men are absent from the family units. And I would love to be able to provide that for them. But also a men's retreat all over the country that men can go to and connect with other like-hearted men and be challenged and be pushed to grow and pushed to go deeper within themselves, to learn practices of what does it look like to reconnect with nature, which is, we are biologically wired for nature as men. We all are. Yet we're so disconnected from it. I mean, I feel it now. I have the awareness of it. And anytime I sense anxiety, I know I've got to reconnect. I've got to go put my bare feet in some dirt and just be in nature for a little bit. And so a place where they can, come back to their roots and simplify their life and heal and grow together and be challenged. I have to surround myself by people that are greater than me, because if I'm the smartest man in the room, I'm in the wrong room.
Well said. that is very well said.
But I would love to have those two retreats first and foremost.
Well, I'm sure you will. That's going to happen for you. And here's how I know that's going to happen, is because you know that you want to make that happen. And a lot of us go about life wishing that things were better, but we can't figure out what better means. You've done that. I very much appreciate your time. There's, I could go through this podcast and, there's 100 times when I thought I ought to stop this guy and ask him about that. But you were on a roll, and the roll that you were on, I didn't want to stop that train. So, yeah, we could do 100 more podcasts, but yeah, I very much appreciate your time. If one last question, let's say that you could go back in time to go visit a younger you, and you could give him any advice you want. What age dude would that be, and what would you tell him?
I do this quite often with journaling and the shadow work that I do. I'm often communicating with these parts of myself. I would go back to age 7, which I've done through, writing and hypnotherapy work. However, the one message I would provide that little boy, and I often say this to him: I love you, and you're allowed to feel scared.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. And for the work that you're doing. We need this.